Welcome to Unbound. You're here for conscious chats that go deeper than your Instagram feed, where we ditch the dogma but keep it real. So let's get unbound. Welcome back, Hannah.
Thanks, Georgia. Delighted to be here. Feels like forever.
It does feel like a while.
I know. And it's quite exciting. It's your first day in a studio.
It's the second record in a studio, but I am enjoying it, I have to say. I was like, how do I really want this to flow? I just want to be able to show up and talk. And here we are. There is a solution for that.
No, it's so lovely.
It's so good.
Lovely. It's almost like there's this weird feeling of the whiplash of not having to do things, like not having to be aware of the things that you're normally having to be aware of.
No, I was leaving the house like, what? Don't I need something else? Like, am I supposed to bring things? Like, and they're like, nothing's required. Just walk in. Great. It's really cut our tech issues down, and quite timely with Mercury retrograde, because God knows what that was going to do to us.
Time to choose a studio.
Always keeping a tab on the astrology.
Yes. Well, the cosmic fog, let me tell you, is thick at the minute. So I'm glad that we've navigated that. You'll be pleased to know I had this fleeting thought this week, and I thought she'll hate this. I hope I have time to do it. And where I was going to go to a second-hand shop and find the biggest mug that I could ever lay my hands on, and so that I could then present you with the last thing that you wanted to see, which was an even bigger mug than I've had before. But unfortunately, for you, me, and anyone who's watching this, I couldn't do it.
Oh, well, it'll be, a surprise for a special episode, which one will have the giant mug.
Fun. And that'll keep them coming back,
It's all about the mug. That's it.
It's all
just here for the mug. We should maybe someone wants to sponsor that mug.
Yeah, maybe we need to have Unbound mugs.
Yeah, true. Oh, I'll leave that in your capable hands. Mug procurement.
Yeah. Listen, I'm happy for these sorts of missions.
Look, Untidy's over. Surely you've got plenty of time on your hands now.
For sorting out your merch. I never even had time to sort out our own merch. Oh, gosh. Yes, it is. I'm all yours now for the time being. So,
I know. We're lucky. We've got undivided Hannah, everyone. So who knows what litany of life issues she's going to bring for us to resolve in Unbound.
Here's something I prepared earlier to have my nice private one-on-one session with my mentor.
Yeah, what are we diving into today, Hannah?
Conflict. How to fight good. And let's get into how to rip and repair, because I think we've talked in the past we've talked so much about relationships and, sometimes a lack of role modeling in healthy relationships, and also role modeling in healthy conflict and healthy conflict resolution is a whole other part of that. It's all very well to aim for a healthy relationship and strive for doing all those things that will make that happen, but ultimately at some point you're going to have a bump in the road, you're going to have a miscommunication, something is going to come up where there needs to be some robust conversation. You need to express yourselves and then find a way back and reconnect. And obviously, I'm in a relationship now. It's been
so obviously
a year and a half. We've had at least one conflict.
Let's not pretend. I'm asking about a friend who mentioned to me this conflict that she had.
Obviously, this has never happened to us.
No, I mean, this is not, and yet we're still waiting for our conflict. But for others,
I hear it's really an issue. Oh, and it's not just what we watch on TV, which I think is, in terms of most frequent conflict issues, it is compromising on what we watch on TV. But we did have a genuine misunderstanding, and we won't get into the nitty gritty of the details, but ultimately it ended in, there needs to be a robust conversation here. And going through that process, I was very aware of that. I'm at this point in my life where I'm not going to compromise on the need to express myself fully. And I'll try and do that in a conscious way. Like, I'm not going to like throw things and yell and scream and, but there's, I was aware of some fear around saying like, I am feeling angry about this. Like the words, getting myself to say the words, I am feeling angry about this actually felt really, it was tough. That like I felt the resistance in me to say those words and to own that feeling and to be allowed to and to tell someone and then to also trust that I wasn't going to be rejected for having anger. So maybe let's start there.
Well, let me ask you the question. If you had to say, I'm sad about this, would there be as much resistance?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
It's easier to be sad and hurt and to cry.
Yeah, I mean, it's a biggie because for women, primarily, obviously, for men, they're in a different category where in a lot of spaces, anger was the only feeling or emotion. And in fact, it was often unconscious. They'll say that, they're relaxed or they're, well, you're so emotional, but they would be exhibiting, strong periods or outbursts of anger. But anger was really the only acceptable emotion for a man to feel, and for women, were generally not allowed to be angry because it meant that, you weren't the good girl, the pretty girl, the one that, sits and makes it all easy for others. And so it's okay for us to be in our weakness, but not necessarily in our strength in some settings. And this is why so many women struggle with anger as emotion. Now, we all bodies, regardless of gender or gender identification, have the full range and spectrum of emotion. Everyone has anger, everyone has sadness, everyone has fear. The whole spectrum is there inside all bodies. So this whole, denial of one gender over another, gets more angry, it's just a case of suppression, ultimately, how much suppression is going on there. So, I've worked with so many women who find that underneath the sadness is suppressed anger. And the anger just builds and builds, and then it becomes, internalized. It can cause disease on an internal level, inflammation, those kind of things when it gets turned inwards, when we don't fully express it. Now, as you've said, the way that we express it is important. We can probably get into, what is a process for navigating the trigger through to the conversation, and there's kind of a few pieces in there. But certainly, firstly, recognizing that anger is a natural emotion. If we suppress it, it actually becomes unhealthy for us and those around us. And that means that some significant boundary has been crossed, or a significant trigger has occurred, or something that you have witnessed or experienced inside you that's important, to have a strong emotion like that. It's telling you something. So also it's a protection mechanism. It's really important for women to have that protection. If you feel that anger come up, then it's not always that you're 100% right and that they're in the wrong. It's just that there's something important for you to tend to there. So I think even being aware and having that consciousness that perhaps the reason why we don't feel comfortable being in our anger is this reason, which I'm sure you're aware of, is that, for women it's not attractive to be angry. It's okay to maybe cry because that's the kind of, if you think of the stereotypical woman, crying, helpless, needs to, be taken care of, all of these things. But the empowered woman who can say, I'm angry about this and hold a firm boundary, can be experienced as a bit of a threat sometimes if a man's not able to hold himself in those moments and be able to witness a woman in the full spectrum of all of her, from the Vedic perspective, the divine feminine is an entire spectrum, and there are expressions of that move from the softest of the soft to the fiercest of the fierce. And I particularly really align with that view of the feminine because I think in our own experience, we notice in 1 month, we will run up and down that entire spectrum on different days. And so this idea that, some of the, traditions or even religions have presented the feminine as one kind of soft version that, is... And that's beautiful, but it doesn't mean that that's the only expression that we might have, or that, anger is not also part of the divine play and the fierceness. But it's about bringing it into balance, and how does that get expressed in a balanced way, and how can it be alchemized into ultimately authentic power? If you're able to alchemize your anger, it becomes clarity once it's fully alchemized. So if we either reject it or suppress it or pretend it's not there, oh no, and gaslight yourself is very common. Oh no, I shouldn't be angry about this. No, I'm not angry. No, I'm this. No, I'm that. I mean, we even see men will often do that as well. No, I'm not angry. And they're literally yelling at the time. It's like just a lack of awareness of what actually is going on in the system, which comes down to, emotional awareness, self-awareness, regulation. Let's touch on those as we progress through the episode. But we have to, start to practice allowing that feeling to come up, allowing ourselves to feel it and acknowledge it. I'm angry. Just that's the beginning, right? Before you even get to having the conversation with the partner, which we'll come to. But just like, okay, I'm angry. Now, why am I angry? What's going on here? Like, it's worth kind of exploring whenever we get triggered. I mean, this is the process that I go through within myself. Is there will be some kind of, if it's a very strong emotional response, whatever it is, or I just feel suddenly not good, suddenly not connected to the partner, suddenly not even present in the body, that disembodiment where you don't feel like you can kind of be there in the body. The way that we respond in different situations is going to be dependent on what is the underlying source cause and where is it coming from and what did you learn as a coping mechanism at that time, which the very next thing you want to do will be very telling. It's quite interesting. Like, are you suddenly wanting to avoid, pull away, go and do something like work, run, eat, drink? There's going to be a pattern of behavior that comes up directly after that as a way to navigate the intensity of the emotion, which if you do for a little bit, maybe okay, and then you take some time. Space is always a good thing to process. You can't really fully process something, in the direct presence of another. So maybe you step away and you're kind of off doing something, and that's when you're kind of percolating and letting it kind of move through you. But the more we avoid the feeling, the less clarity we're going to have about it and the less we allow it to fully alchemize within us. So there can be another tendency to go straight into the partner and be like, well, I'm uncomfortable. You're the source of this. So now I just kind of part of me wants to just let it all out on them, like let them have it, like you're the source of it, and I just want to, express. Anger particularly is the one that we tend to project because it's a much more forceful outward emotion, so it can tend to get projected onto others, and you might have been at the receiving end of that and received the anger of another, which you might have felt, where has this come from? Does this even have anything to do with me? This seems like it's about something else, which is very common. So it's really important to take the time to be with your own emotional state and start to practice leaning into it. There is this saying in the Vedas that I've been sharing in a number of episodes, but we'll just say it again, which is that when you lean into the poisons, they become pleasures. And when you lean into the pleasures, they become poisons. So this means that when we lean into the shadow, when we lean into the uncomfortable emotion, the discomfort in any moment, actually it alchemizes into bliss, into power, into presence once we can fully, alchemize it into our system. And what does alchemize mean? It just means allowing it to move through you to the point where you don't resist it. Because the moment we resist it creates suppression, and that which we resist persists. So when we feel into it, which is like a practice of opening. So the first thing is not rejecting the emotion. It's not wrong that you feel something at any point in time. It just is. Can we be with what is? Okay, what is happening right now while I'm feeling multiple things at once? I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm afraid. Sometimes it's not just one thing. So I'm feeling all of these things. Okay, where am I feeling it? Can I just open to this moment and trust that nature is organizing something for my highest good rather than it's all going wrong? Because the fear of your own emotions is another layer, which is sitting there going, okay, this is all wrong, something's wrong, I shouldn't have to feel this. Who's the source of that? If I can just blame that person or that circumstance or that thing or the government or my boss or my partner or my child or my upbringing or my parents, you've got endless people to blame if you want to blame someone. But that also is a pathway of rejection and suppression because that prevents us. That's one of the subtle ways that we prevent ourselves from having to feel anything, having to take accountability, and ultimately the healing that's possible in that moment if we really show up for it. And by show up for it, I mean lean in. So leaning in means opening, like, okay, I am uncomfortable. This isn't my preference for what I might be wanting to feel right now. Like quite often I'll have thoughts like, oh, I don't have time for this. I've got to go, and I'd planned to go to the gym. I'd planned to do this, work right now. And now I'm processing this trigger, which might take a few hours or a day, to resolve a conflict with a partner or something. And that kind of voice that's like, I don't have time for this. It is another way of, it's probably a projection from childhood where, a parent didn't have time for you or your emotions at that time. And so you kind of then play that out within yourself again later. So I also, watch that voice and I'm like, okay, but if everything's perfect as it is, if this moment is the way it's meant to be, then I'm going to just, yes, witness that, but not buy into it. Come back again to the feeling, the emotion. What am I feeling? Can I open up and feel, like, just let it move through, let it kind of be like an energy force that moves through you is how we get to the alchemy. And so with anger, we have to allow ourselves to feel it, which is like, what does it feel to get more angry in this moment? Like, if you're feeling it, it's going to grow when you move towards it. So moving towards the poison where we know it's going to become pleasure ultimately. There's this exquisite feeling of the intensity. Like, if you can actually, instead of being in judgment of it, and the storyline is, my partner said this, that, I've told them that before and they still did it, whatever it is. If you can come away from the storyline back to the sensation, back to the body, okay, and your mind's going to want to go there because what it's doing every time is constant escape. Escape the feeling, any other thing, the person, the storyline, the excuse, the blame is all escaping from the sensation. But the sensation is where the power is, and the sensation is what is the true need of the time right now, is not to deal with the storyline. Yes, that will come to that, what's needed afterwards, but to actually allow yourself to feel something, because I guarantee you, if you're feeling a strong trigger like that, if you're feeling strong anger, this is not fully about the situation that's happening now. The situation that's happening now might carry 10%, 5%, probably even maximum 20% of, unless something genuinely has happened, like they've cheated on you, okay, that's probably going to be a good 80 to 90% of the sensation. But mostly in relationship, it's other childhood stuff that's coming up, that the partner is playing a role for you here on the higher level. They're playing a role for you to draw that out of you, the thorn to release the deeper thorn, as Michael Singer calls it in his book, The Untethered Soul. That if you can zoom out even just a percentage, a small 1-2% of your awareness is holding space, like this actually is meant to be happening, and what, if it is meant to be happening, what's here for me? And then if I am feeling this intensity, it must be to do with other things, which means this is actually my moment to heal that right now. I've got a choice here. I can go back down the pathway of suppression, rejection, judgment of my own anger, so I continue to repress it, blame of others, and then I never really get to the core of what's wanting to be healed here and shifted here, which is actually providing me with a higher opportunity. Because if I do that, then I'm going to be free. I'm free of that percentage of that sensation that still exists within me. I'm free of a percentage of the unexpressed anger, because you couldn't as a child fully express your anger. You weren't allowed in almost all cases. Stop that, no, have a lollipop, all the suppression things, like just to stop an emotion. Distraction, yes, it's a great method, but also it teaches a child to distract themselves from their own emotions. So we've all experienced all of that, to quite significant degrees in most cases. So then we never really, and you weren't at a level of maturity where you could be like, Dad, I'm so angry at you for not showing up for me or not hearing me or whatever it might be. And so, of course, there's just so much there. So what nature does in its great intelligence is give you another person that allows you to, they're playing the role of your father in that moment. They're playing the role of your parent. They're playing the role of your early childhood teacher that did something that you weren't able to, fully speak up about. And so now is the time where we reclaim that, which starts with first the processing. So again, opening to the feeling, and it's a bit of a practice because everything in you is like, no, don't feel that. Don't open to that. Oh, what can I possibly do? I can think some more stuff, okay, the thinking starts back to the sensation. Where am I feeling it in the body? And you can teach your kids to do this too. Like, where do you feel it? Tell me about the feeling. Where's the edge of that sensation? And if you can keep bringing your awareness, which awareness is the flow of your consciousness. So you can practice just listening to this podcast right now. If you take your awareness to your belly button, you can get a sensation there. There's an energy there. Depending on how much strength and power your awareness has. It can feel quite strong if you've cultivated that through a lot of meditation. Your awareness, your flow of soma has a lot of power to it, a lot of energy, bliss even. You take your awareness now from the navel to the shoulders, the tips of the shoulders. You can feel just moving your awareness rather than touching or your focus, but awareness. And you can feel energy there or warmth or a sensation. So can you bring your awareness to meet the emotion, to meet the edges of it, to continually come towards it rather than to pull away? So we have to understand this knowledge helps us understand that when we pull away, reject, suppress, avoid, that we're actually just not taking the opportunity to heal it. And then, of course, it persists and it's going to just keep coming up, and nature will keep providing more situations, which are still opportunities to heal, but you're going to be a match for that dynamic because that energy is still vibrating a lot inside of you. So once we can process a little bit of that and come and kind of be with the energy of that emotion. Emotion is sensation. We call it body sensation in the tradition that I was trained in, because emotion, it's such a charged word. Ooh, my emotions, don't be too emotional. There's a sense inside of you. When I started this practice, which would be at least 10 years ago, of moving towards the emotion and feeling the feeling rather than moving away from it, the first thing that would come up would be like, oh no, it's getting too much. It's like a feeling of I can't survive this. It's like, you can actually survive a lot of sensations. Ask any woman that's given birth. There's a magnitude of sensation that you can survive and come along. Right now, Hannah's had 2 children sitting here not thinking about the intensity of those sensations. But at the time, they're literally the magnitude of, human capacity for sensation, incredibly strong. And yet, then you can be back nursing your baby and moving on. I mean, not quite in those simplistic terms, but it's amazing what the body can do. So sensation itself we have a lot of capacity for that, but the mind has ideas. It's like, no, because again, not enough practice of just actually feeling it. It's so liberating just to feel your feelings and not have so much fear around it. And with that practice, if you keep tuning to it, you become far more comfortable with your emotions, which means that you'll also be more comfortable with the emotions of others. So then we can really start to hold space for others, because we're not also, if we try to avoid and distract from our own emotions, our tendency will be with others to also try to, and it's okay, and let's move on, because it's very uncomfortable. And you will have witnessed that probably with parents and other people who, are the original sources of why you're uncomfortable with your own feelings. So as we go through that process of the feeling, then we're starting to get clear of like, okay, I'm feeling there's anger here, and if I process that kind of anger and just feel it, and like maybe you want to have a little like in consciousness, you can scream. Some people like to kind of do it outside or punch a pillow if they feel like I really need to express it. Sometimes dancing, shaking, really moving can help you kind of move it up and out of you. And we're not doing this to avoid a conversation either. That's not the intention of this. It's to fully take responsibility, feel everything, and then get to clarity about what that conversation really is about, because that is healthy conscious relating, not projecting all of your childhood trauma onto your partner as the savior no, that's not going to be the pathway. So as you kind of move with that, you might get more clarity about what's underneath the anger. Then once you process the anger, suddenly there's a deep sadness there, because the anger was actually there to kind of protect you from feeling the sadness and the grief. And I like the question of, when did I first feel like this? It's a really good question to ask yourself to get to the root cause of what it is that is the underlying source of this trauma. And so there will be, or this a feeling, sensation, or samskara, impression. So there will be something there. If we just inquire in consciousness without attachment to an answer, just feeling like, okay, when did I first feel like this? You might get a sense of a time, an age, a situation. You might see a face of a person, or just a time in your life. You might get a little bit of insight. It doesn't need to be a full-blown, this happened and then that happened. It just can be like a sense of a timeline. And then just giving yourself at that age like a lot of love, is that child re-inspiring the past, as we call it in this tradition, or, reparenting. Just being there for that younger version of you, the 5-year-old, 7-year-old, 4-year-old, whatever version is showing up that didn't receive that sense of safety or reassurance, or wasn't seen or heard at that time. And then you'll find that there is, if you combine the feeling with the alchemy of the original source like that, by just tuning in, and again, it's a progression. It doesn't mean that that entire pattern is fully healed, but patterning that over and repeating this process again and again, eventually what that inner child is feeling, because we can alter a lot in consciousness. We can't alter the physical storyline, but the consciousness itself is malleable. So now there is a new imprint in consciousness of, yes, I felt like that, but then this, the inner child experiences it almost like an angel showing up in the moment, which is the more evolved version of you, the now version of you that has so much more awareness, that has cultivated, even a state of sometimes bliss in the body, and, that consciousness that we can have cultivated in meditation, coming back and revisiting and kind of being with her at that time. Now that's an imprint in consciousness. And if you keep imprinting that, she's like, oh yeah, but then this great, I was given this great support, and, this other version of me showed up. And so it was actually all okay. And we can start to let go of this part of us that's gripping on to the original storyline, to the original source trigger. We can kind of let go of that in favor of this other new pattern that's emerging through this reparenting process. So as we do that, we're going to find that the grip of the sensation is starting to ease, and we're starting to move through it. It doesn't mean that it's fully gone, because some of it is related. There's a percentage to what happened in the now time in the storyline with the partner, let's say. And so once we have done that, we can see, okay, this actually really was largely about that, and that's why I got triggered. But now there's conversation that needs to be had, and there might be a residual layer of what is left to talk about. It might be that you're still angry, or now you're like, I was angry, but I'm not. And so it becomes more of a conscious conversation, because we're not now heading into the conversation with the partner for them to fix our emotional state, because we've taken responsibility for that. They can support with co-regulation, absolutely. They can support with understanding and knowing why you had that response, or even telling them you had that response so they have a greater understanding about you as a person, or there may be some change in behavior that is required that you want to express to them, but you're not coming in there in order to project all your emotions onto them and to just make them responsible for your emotional state. So this is kind of taking radical responsibility. As Ram Dass said, the best thing I can do for you is work on myself, and the best thing you can do for me is work on yourself. And this is what that looks like in play, in context, is actually fully taking ownership for what's going on for you. And it may take a little bit of practice. Sometimes you might need to work on it with a therapist or someone who's holding space for you, because you may not immediately be able to get clear on all the things. You don't have to have all the answers, but you'll be surprised what you can get access to by just tuning into yourself with curiosity and compassion, because nature wants you to heal it. Nature wants you to relieve it, to be free of it. That's why the situation has arisen. So then we come to the conversation.
Yeah. Just before we get to the conversation, just reflecting on what you're saying there, it's like, when I was having the really strong feelings of it, and feeling the reaction happening, and then I never want to have a conversation at that point, because that's all feelings. But it's also like, when you're allowing those feelings to move through you, there can be some confusion in terms of, okay, these are the feelings that I'm experiencing moving through me. Why have these feelings shown up in relation to this? And it's like, one part is that, quite physical experience of the sensations of what's happening. And then another part is kind of teasing that out, to follow it down to the root, to go, and why did you show up? What is the story, and what is being able to kind of articulate and name, that anger was there because of, I felt this, it was this part that triggered me. And whether that's, a childhood thing or a previous relationship thing, what is that? How much belongs to my past, my child self, and the way that they were parented? How much belongs to the way I felt failed in previous relationships? And that stuff does come up quite a bit. And that stuff also comes up along with the fear of repeating a same mistake, or allowing something to happen to me again that I would never condone. And it does take quite a bit of time of like allowing all that stuff to wash through and then being able to tease out and recognize where things are. There's a lot to do, Georgia.
It's not going to be a fun process. It's not going to be probably that quick, but you can get better at it. And also you don't have to know all the answers, I mean, I think as you progress, I feel like now I can get quite clear quite quickly on the different threads. And I usually find that there's kind of multiple things there that are happening at the same time. But then, even if it looks like coming to have the conversation with the partner and don't leave it too long. So there's a balance here of getting clear and taking that space to kind of process something and then coming back and having the conversation, relatively soon after that. Because I think especially if you're a little bit conflict averse or you feel like you're afraid of what the reaction's going to be, which is very common for a lot of people, that they've either had a partner that blew up at them in the past or got defensive or made the problem about you, or it was always just a huge conflict rather than a conversation, then you're going to, or you had angry parents or, chaotic situations in childhood, then you're going to have that fear of the conversation becomes another barrier that we have to get through, because the conversation itself is, well, we don't know how the other person's going to react. But I do think it's really helpful to just stay in your own lane. Like, you're not responsible for their reaction. You're not responsible. They've got their own, bundles of trauma and experiences and all the things as well. And all you're there to do in the moment is the part which is yours to own, which is your emotional state. Try and, regulate yourself to a degree, which is just like holding a bigger part of you online, while there's also going to be sensation. The sensation will not be completely resolved, because the last part of it's going to resolve in the conversation and how it's met with the partner. So, but if we can come in with, a little bit more of the adult self online rather than the child self fully online would look like, just wanting to throw your toys out and blame the partner and start the yelling and all the things. And so it's not honoring of the relationship. It's not taking responsibility for your role in this and what part is yours. And it's also not going to achieve the outcome, which we have to remember when we come to the conversation, is that what we're really looking for in most cases is unity, is to actually find greater unity together as a couple. And these situations, I had one come up last week with mystery boyfriend, and I was like, I can't even talk about the circumstances. I was like, how has this even occurred? And I just had to be like, you know what? All right, nature, like, this is what you want. I'm going to have to like stay in it, because my mind wanted to be like, how did that happen? And why did that come around to him like that? And blah, blah, blah. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to accept and stay online with this must be meant to be happening. And, I was like, is this going to destabilize us completely? Like, there's a chance of that. And I just had to be like, okay, well, whatever's good. If we're not meant to continue, then that will happen. If we are, then, and that's obviously my preference, but I'm going to have to face this head on and not, my mind's like wanting to waste time and how did it happen and should it be happening and why did it happen? It's like, that is just a useless exercise. It has happened, which means it's meant to be happening. And then there's this kind of process where the friction occurs. Like, Esther Perel talks about friction, a certain amount of tension, which actually creates intimacy. It creates the desire for another. Like, we sometimes think we're looking for, I think, and often I witness it in myself from time to time, is that we kind of want the other person to be the same. Like, we want them to be just like us, which is unity ultimately, is like oneness. But it doesn't create the flow of love. And where we actually find the excitement is in the difference. The excitement is in the person who doesn't just do what you say all the time. Like, you're going to get bored of that, for example, if that's a dynamic. Or if they do all the things you want to do all the time, you're like, I kind of want a little bit of, there needs to be a little bit of, the difference is actually what creates a little bit of the excitement. And there's very much a balance between excitement being, there's too much difference, or excitement being based on trauma or anxiety, not that kind of excitement. But nature, you don't need to create it over and above, but nature will bring these opportunities where there is a little bit of friction, and it creates an opportunity, an opening for actually a deeper coming together if you can ride the whole cycle, if it's meant to go that way. And that will depend on both parties. I mean, you can't be responsible for the way your partner shows up. They're in charge of that. You can comment on it. You can reflect back, say, how they might be showing up if they're getting defensive or they're not allowing you to talk, or to say, hey, I'm actually only bringing this to you because I care about the relationship. It feels like you're taking it like a little bit of an attack, but actually, if I wasn't to bring you this. The thing is, like, what women are often doing is if they're not bringing things, they have brought things before, it wasn't met well, and now they're in a accumulation bucket of how many more things before I end this relationship. So, often if a partner can realize that often the woman is doing, or the one who's showing maybe emotional leadership from time to time and bringing things up is actually to further strengthen the relationship. Because if we don't bring it up, it's just, shoving things under the carpet, and we know that doesn't really end well, because eventually that carpet's going to come up and then there's just a whole mess that's too big to deal with. Way too many dust bunnies, and now, it's demolition time. So it does have this arc to it where the opportunity is for greater unity, and there is this difference that, another person is providing you. They're interesting because they have a different thought system to you, and they do different things to you, and that's actually what you want in a relationship. You don't want a version of you. You're already there. You're already bored with yourself, or else be in relationship with yourself is a perfectly valid option. It's great. Did it for a long time. But we have to also remind ourselves of that as well at times, where it's like this, we need to respect and honor the person as another whole being that, and if we don't respect them and we're not interested in what they have to say and how they do things and what their worldview is, then, we should really cut them free. So it's not fair to be in a relationship if that's not the case. But when something comes up, if you can keep that part of you online, like, this is here to help us. I can't see that right now, because another part of me is like, oh, this might be, for me, it's like this could destabilize things. So I haven't really had a model either for relationship repair, like you say. So I was like, all I've seen is, people say to me, oh, it's all about communication. It's not really just about communication. Lots of people are communicating things, but there isn't regulation. And then there isn't awareness and taking responsibility. And I think we actually need that whole spectrum. Just communicating, people will be like, oh, I am telling you, but they're just yelling at you the thing. Or they're never really getting to the root cause of what it is for them that is making them so upset or anxious or angry or whatever it might be. So communication by itself, no, not good enough. Like, it's just not enough. How are you communicating? We can't just have one thing like, oh, the communication. Yes, I'm saying things. I told you that. I've told you a million times. Okay. You can't really receive that of just being yelled at, for example. Or you are communicating, but, or your partner's communicating and one of you's just getting defensive every time. Then there's no actual resolution, because there's not enough regulation, not enough accountability, not enough awareness. So all those things have to be there as well, which are things that we can grow and cultivate, which is the great thing. And we might need someone to help us with that. But yeah, keeping this sense of it's happening for a reason. Whatever state our relationship is in, it's there to show us something. It's mirroring something back, and we're better to look at it. We're better to lean into the poison so that they can become pleasures. And that's either it's going to alchemize and bring us closer together, or we're going to heal something in ourselves, or we're going to realize that we're not aligned, or we can't navigate conflict together, or we need help doing that, and we become ultimately liberated out of that relationship to find someone with whom we can do that. But yeah, so, when we come into the conversation, it's got to be about the high intention there is unity. The option is unity, and you're 50% responsible for that, and the other person is 50% responsible. So you take your 50%, which is I'm in charge of how I show up, and you might be the one that's showing leadership on that level. The other person might be a lot more dysregulated than you. You have the option to say, can you take some space and come back when you're able to talk about this clearly, because I don't think we're getting anywhere. But the more one person can at least hold that groundedness, the less the other one is going to be able to activate more and more and more, because you're staying in a place of you're feeling things, but you're also holding online an openness to hear, to listen, to be curious about the other, not just to come in with your agenda, like I'm angry and this is all about, okay, yes, that is there, that's one piece. But I'm in partnership with another, which means I have to be interested in their point of view. I have to be curious. I have to be willing to listen to what they actually meant and what actually happened versus what my projection might be. And because I've done my internal review process, I'm aware of where my projections might lie. And if you can speak to that, that is what conscious relating looks like. Taking accountability is to speak to and to come in and say, hey, Johnny, I was, really angry yesterday when such and such happened. I first felt really angry and I wanted to go away and just kind of work on it inside myself of like, why was I so angry about that thing? Because obviously the thing itself maybe is not that big. And so I realized, there's something here in it for me. And in my process, I recognize there's also some sadness, which has to do with, some stuff from my childhood probably. You might not even know, but you just might say, like, I think it's some other stuff from, my own childhood. But I guess, I just wanted to talk to you about it because it is something when that kind of thing happens, it does make me feel like this. And this is based on my past relationship or my ex-partner used to, do this. It does bring up fear in me. And really in that you're not making it their problem to solve. You're not putting it on them. You're taking responsibility, but you're also sharing the full arc of the experience, which is radical vulnerability. And that gives them the option to understand you better. And they have the capacity then to maybe adjust. That might be something that they're going to continue to do because it's something that's important to them, or it's not something that they need to change in order for the relationship to continue. It depends on where you sit on it. But they can be more aware. They can be more sensitive about it. They might even say to you, hey, I'm actually going to do this thing. Is that okay with you? I know that sometimes brings things up for you, or whatever it might be. There can be a lot more awareness around it, which creates, even if they don't change it, it creates the sense of being seen and heard, which is sometimes just the thing that you're looking for is actually that. It's not actually about the behavior. I will often say, it's not about the dishes, not about how one stacks the dishwasher. Like these kind of things are what ends up, becoming these sources of resentments and consistent fights in marriages over a long period of time, because it's not about that. It's about the early resentments about not being seen and heard or appreciated in other areas. And then that will also track back to childhood as well. So we can never take that origin source piece out of it. Yeah.
If you're looking to go deeper in life and find a tool for greater regulation, I'd highly recommend learning Vedic meditation, which is the foundational practice I've relied on since 2016 and teach full time. It's an effortless practice which uses a particular type of mantra to take the mind beyond thought, rests the body deeper than sleep, and rapidly releases stress. I teach in Aotearoa in Byron Bay in Australia, but can also put you in touch with a local teacher. Reach out via Instagram at GV Meditation or via gvmeditation.com. You'll love it.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue, I love the example that you've just used. I was having a little chuckle to myself because I've seen the way you stack a dishwasher, Georgia. Convenient.
Exactly. And you know what I say to mystery boyfriend, we've discussed it. I'm like, but what you get is just so much, I'm so calm and so relaxed. And he's like, yep, and I'll take that any day of the week over a perfectly stacked dishwasher. And I'm like, great, deal done, There's
always one person in a relationship that stacks a dishwasher really, really carefully and someone that just throws it in. And I think we know who we're talking about.
And we know where our roles lie. I know, where my skills and strengths are.
I really and agree with everything you've just said, because every 3 or 4 weeks we chat to a relationship therapist because I wanted to be one of those cool couples that has kind of like a relationship coach. I always envied those couples who are like, and we just want to have the best, strongest relationship. And I'm like, I want to be that. So anyway, this is what we do. And she said something in our last session when we were talking about this conflict about when you choose to overcome the fear of expressing what you need to express and say what you need to say, that is choosing to stay close to the other person. That choice then is choosing unity and choosing intimacy. And I just was like, oh, that was actually such a good way to put it, because it is making a different choice to maybe previous relationships. So even though sometimes you think oh God, we've had this conversation and we've had that conversation and I'm exhausted for the conversations, but you're like, oh no, but this is choosing in these moments, we're choosing closeness, we're actually choosing intimacy, because we also trust that the other person is going to show up, and that we are going to finish this being more united than we were before. I just find that I found that a really helpful thought. And also letting the other person be responsible for how they are showing up in the conversation. And I think, sometimes I know what my reactions can be when I sort of go back into the like emotional reaction, because when you have the conversation, like you've tidied away most of the stuff, but stuff's going to come up when you go back through it.
Yeah.
Even if you're articulating things more clearly and can actually move things forward with more clarity, there's still going to be moments when there's like just a little trigger, and then you sometimes have your reaction that you revert to, which you never feel completely proud of later, but you're like, oh, that's the thing that I revert back to in those moments. And then the other person often has their thing that they revert back to, whether that be a little bit of defensiveness or whatever, or like saying the thing that you're like, oh, say that thing again, and finding a little bit of grace for that, and not kind of focusing on that moment of like, oh, and then you said the thing that was a little bit wrong, because ultimately after all of it, you kind of come round to the more conscious part, and the part that you both want to land on, which is the greater unity.
I think you're also learning let's say a conflict style, or you're learning how to navigate conflict together, which is a process. And the more that you have awareness in yourself of what exactly went on for you, and they're going to witness you in that. Even if they're not doing it, they're going to think, oh, maybe, I should also do that process. It can sometimes trigger them to think, oh, well, maybe there's something going on for me, or I should look at what it is for me that's coming up here. I mean, we'd hope for that. But you're learning how to hold yourself and stay. It's kind of like, sometimes it feels like you're pressing up against an electric fence, particularly if you're not if you're conflict averse, or you've got a lot of, presupposed ideas around how conflict will go and what the outcome will be, which is very common. And so it can feel like you're like literally being like holding yourself, like being zapped in that moment. But there is what's happening when you're actually met with a partner that stays with you, that's interested in your, point of view, what you're feeling, that can hold that space, and then you come through to the resolution, and then you come to the part after where you reconnect and you actually move forward. That whole arc, you may never have experienced it, or not very often. You never really got to that point in your childhood because you weren't allowed to express your emotions. You weren't allowed to hold the parent accountable. You may have tried, or you may have used other coping mechanisms to avoid the sensation. So in that moment, the reclamation is happening, the reclamation of your voice, the reclamation of the capacity to feel a big emotion and come back from it and actually come back to greater unity. I mean, there is always, you find that, after you've navigated that, there's a greater intimacy, and that's where real relating begins. Is not in the beginning stages of relationship where there's just chemistry, you don't really know each other, and you're just kind of riding off the waves of excitement and all the easy time because you haven't hit any kind of like trigger. And a lot of people will stay in that zone and then just continually eject out of relationships the moment it becomes about actual relating which is actually navigating conflict. Like if we're not having robust conversations, then we're not expressing. They don't have to be arguments, they don't even have to be conflict, but they're going to need to be conversations where you're holding someone accountable or expressing needs, wants, desires. I mean, even often it can be for women just saying what you really want. It could be sexually, it could be in a relationship, it could be desires that you have that you don't feel worthy of because you've never had a partner honor those before, or taking time to yourself. Maybe you feel like you need to constantly be there with the partner all the time, or asking the partner to be with you at certain moments. Whatever it might be, we all have a totally different range of what we desire on all of those levels. But even speaking up for that, the first time you do it is going to be a little bit scary, but this is where you're seeing whether this person actually is going to make you happy. I mean, not make you happy in the sense of, we have to remember that's not what we're looking for from a relationship, but are you going to be able to, happily relate? Are they going to be able to give you what you're really looking for in a relationship? And so we want to, and that's why that desire arose in you, and you felt the contraction, like, oh, I can't ask for that, or immediately your mind's like, oh, they're never going to give me that. And then you go into like a disappointment and contraction, depletion, depression cycle, and you haven't even spoken to the partner, you have no idea. That can happen all inside your own head, because so much is being held inside. But the moment that you speak to it is when you get to see this is the moment which nature has arranged for you to bring up that thing so that you can see, which way are we going here? Are we moving towards each other? And maybe it's a few conversations and then it lands in some way with the partner, or you find how it's going to work between you and you negotiate what the balance is going to look like. Sometimes, yes, they will do that, and sometimes no, whatever it's going to be. But that's the actual part where real, true intimacy is being created. In the beginning, it's just chemistry. And honestly, you can have that with a lot of different people. And they're people that you will never be able to live or cohabitate or relate with over the long term, because there's no demonstration of the deeper qualities, the deeper characteristics. True character has to be, it gets exposed in those moments. Like, can you take responsibility? Can you take accountability? Are you willing to, really hear your partner? Can you say sorry? Can you take feedback? Can you accept criticism? Can you adjust your behavior? I mean, these are things that are absolutely required in a relationship. And so in the beginning stages, which is, the first couple of years at least, really, then all of these opportunities, if we can see them, and that's what your relationship mentor is really saying, is that, this is an opportunity to come closer together. And that's the intimacy is being built in that moment. And there's an opportunity there for your partner to show up for you. And sometimes they're looking for that. They want to, and they get to see you too. Like, how do you navigate that in that moment? Who do you become? And if someone that can hold all the parts of you, I mean, that is what we're really looking for in ourselves. We want to be able to hold all of the parts and see all the parts of us, turning the light on to the parts that we don't like, that we're ashamed of, the sadness, the fear, the shame, the guilt, the anger, whatever it might be. And also to, be seen. There's a certain beauty and intimacy in relationship where that person will see lots of parts of you and moments of you and sides of you, and you will choose to, out of trust, reveal over time in these moments parts of you that a lot of other people will never really see. That is a very special, sacred offering that you make to the partner, and how they receive that. Like, when you hear from your partner, they reveal some difficult time in their life or something vulnerable that they're not sharing with other people. It feels like such a sacred gift. Like, you feel quite honored that they're sharing it with you, and the right attitude about it, you kind of want to hold that with a level of sacredness and reverence and not use it against them. And if someone does take something you've offered them in a sacred, intimate space like that and shared a vulnerability that they then use against you, that is immediate information about the lack of emotional safety in the relationship. It's important to kind of recognize that, and you may have faced that before, and so you're going to come up. But if you're going to be relating, we've got to give the person the opportunity to show us who they really are, rather than who we're projecting them to be. And we're honestly, if you're dating men, you're projecting them to be your father. You're projecting them to be what you experienced at an early stage of life. You're projecting them to be all your other partners combined. You are waiting for that shoe to drop. Like, are they going to do the thing that, your significant partners have done? And each time they don't do it, or if they come at it a different way, there is healing that's taking place. That's giving you the opportunity to heal the other experiences, and the part of you that's like, I'm always going to be treated like this, or I'm always going to experience this. That's the belief system that's running, and now you're reprogramming that in that moment. They have to be given the opportunity.
It's amazing when you get to the point of, like, you've finished the conversation and you feel heard and seen and understood, and you've made this progress together, or you've both taken accountability for your part in it. How meaningful and how much intimacy some of those things that might seem kind of insignificant, how much intimacy that creates. Like, and especially if like, I haven't had many relationships where I've been with someone who was able to take accountability and also have the ability to, like, go and reflect and then come back and pick up the conversation again after they'd reflected and take accountability. I'm like, God, that's so hot. It really is. Right.
I honestly think emotional maturity is the most attractive trait that I can possibly name in a partner. Like, it generates a level of respect as well. And I think that, you need to really respect your partner. And I've realized the thing I respect most is honestly emotional maturity. Like I really respect that. I find it hard to respect it if, they're unwilling. It doesn't mean that there's not patterns that you're working on. Aren't we all? But being able to speak to that. And I think sometimes people are like, oh, I don't know how to communicate or what to say. It literally is as simple as just speaking to what's going on in your experience. It's just actually saying, this happened, then I felt like this, then I thought that, then I went away and did this, and then when I was doing that, I thought about this and that, and I think where it comes from maybe is this, or it could be that. I guess it doesn't really matter. That's something that I kind of want to tune to, but I guess what I'm really want you to know is this. It's just literally step by step speaking to. It doesn't need to be any more complicated. You don't need a whole like Esther Perel designed essay of what you're going to say to your partner. It's just speaking to what actually happened, what came up in you from where, and it's the vulnerability of that. Because these are sometimes cringy things, sometimes things that, don't make logical sense. Emotions are not based in logic. They're based in feeling. But if you think about it, you can probably track it back to some relationship or experience that you had. You can give it some context and that will help them understand you more. Yeah. And then if your partner can do that as well, then you're like, it's so freeing because you're not being made the problem in the situation. Like think about what you want to receive as well. If you can show up in that way for the partner. Well, I want to receive, I'm not being made the problem when there maybe are things that I can adjust. Like if I'm hurting them in some way, even if it is about their own past trauma or triggers or relationships, then I'm naturally, if I care about them, I'm going to want to adjust that in some way, be sensitive to it, be aware of it. I'm not going to give up my values, the things that are important to me, but I can have awareness, sensitivity, and there's a certain amount of bandwidth for adjustment. We have to be able to adjust to two people coming together, two lives, two histories, if you're going to live together, two entirely different ways of doing almost everything, It's like you have to be able to adjust in order to be in relationship with another person. And I think the difficulty comes where we don't want to adjust anything and, people will say, well, this is just how I am. I'm like, okay, but you're now choosing to relate, which means like there's you, there's the other person, and then there's the relationship, which is its third own being. And so we need to be tending to that relationship. We need to be putting logs on that fire. We need to be understanding that, and this person is here to teach us. So we need to be open to learning from the partner, and they might be learning in one area from us, and we might be learning in another from them, being open to that because that is one of the markers of successful relationships. I think it comes from the Gottmans, who did a lot of relational research. They talked about the partners that could receive or learn from the other partner as being one of the markers for long-term success, and how people fought or had arguments or how they resolved conflict was another one. So it does matter because that ultimately, sometimes the times you can feel most close to a partner is when you've shared these vulnerable parts of yourself, the parts that don't make sense, the parts that might be a bit cringy or you might be a bit embarrassed of, or you feel, sensitive about sharing, and they're able to meet that and hold you and not run and not gaslight, not get defensive and not shame or judge you. And then how much you can't really feel much more close to a person than that. It's not about having the same hobby and, bicycling together all the time, though that will bring some unity. But emotional relating is what relationships are about. And so that's where the closeness really comes, because also if your relationship's just based on things that you do together, eventually you won't be able to do those. One gets injured, one changes their mind, one gets a new hobby, you go through having children, things change. So there are going to be challenges, and it is going to come down to ultimately how do you navigate that. You can see there's so many couples that started out together, having a certain amount of unity and getting on, but they didn't develop the foundational piece, which I think is so great, is that you're seeing a relationship mentor, because humans are not good at relationships. We're not. That's the thing. Look at the track record. Like we'll spend all this money on, seeing the naturopath or the chiropractor or the doctor or getting a gym, a fitness instructor or whatever it might be. But the last thing we'll invest in relationship is the relationship. And yet it's so foundational, because when you're working through these triggers, you are offline. You're offline from your work, you're not present, you're not able to do other things often because it's really touching those deepest, most tender parts of you, the part that's wanting love and acceptance, the part that wants to be seen, that wants to be heard, the fear of abandonment. These are deep, deep rooted parts of us, deep wounds that are being touched upon that can really only get healed in relationship because they involve another. So yes, we can work on, how do I activate? How do I stay with something? How do I move out of procrastination? How do I develop my confidence? There's so many other areas that we can work on our own, but we cannot address attachment wounds without attachment. So that's why often with avoidant tendency or people that choose to, just consistently be alone, it's easier for them because they're never brought up against the electric fence that relating and attachment actually is going to require of them is to touch on those parts. And that can be confusing in a relationship because now you're getting triggered, well, this isn't good. I thought I was just coming here to feel good. It's the same with meditation, stress release starts and people are like, oh, but I thought I was just coming here to get zen. It's like you are, but because directly of the stress release that's taking place. So if you don't have the understanding of that, you're going to be like, oh, well, this isn't working for me because I'm having lots of thoughts, I'm releasing stress, or occasionally my meditation feels uncomfortable. That's good. That's the release is happening, which is going to create more bandwidth, more ability to feel peaceful and calm and present outside of meditation. But it's the same in relationship. It can feel like, well, this is all wrong because now we've hit the skids. Oh, relationships always go like this. Now it's getting crunchy. Oh, women are always like that. Men are always like that. These are the kind of the unconscious thoughts that you can have. And so someone can just keep ending up breaking up or ejecting out of the relationship the moment that, and it might be the moment things get vulnerable because intimacy is a source of fear. It might be the moment that emotions start to come and be shared other than just sexual attraction and joy and playfulness and, feeling lots of sensation in the heart. Like you can feel all of that and still not have any emotional intimacy. So once that emotional intimacy starts to come online, that can be where someone will eject. And you might have experienced that, people in the past and micro relationships that you've had, or you've seen that pattern in people that because it's easier in that sense. It feels easier because I never have to come up against my wounding, my patterning, and then I feel, free, and I can just have these short sort of romantic affairs or, always be in long distance in relationship and then never really have to, show up and meet the parts of myself that I'm afraid of. But the beautiful thing is that there's so much healing that can come from putting yourself leaning into the poisons that then become pleasures. And they become pleasures because of the alchemy, because of the relief that can come from that feeling of like, this isn't happening this time with the right partner. This isn't happening this time where I'm being abandoned, or the things that happened at the original source of that trauma where you weren't able to speak up, or every time you spoke up, the parent yelled or, withdrew or gave you the silent treatment or criticized you or gaslit you or whatever it might be, said mean things. If you're with a partner that's got a level of emotional maturity and they're not doing that, that is where it becomes the pleasures. It's like this feeling of relief, like, that part of you's been looking to be met in that way. And there has this shedding is sort of taking place as that happens, the shedding of the projection, I thought it was going to go like this and now it's not. And that the opening up of your awareness to, this is a new possibility now, that not everyone is going to actually be like that. Not all men or women or people are like that. And so that is the healing happening in play.
And I think it's true. It's really nice to experience it, quite honestly, because, there were definitely times in my life where I'm like, will I ever get to experience what a truly healthy relationship is and get to experience healing through relationship? And there was another point in this scenario where I was like, what do you do at this point? Which is when you've had the conversation and you've reached understanding and resolution, but when you've both been there and shown up and been really vulnerable, at the end you still feel quite open, a little raw, a little tender. And it's that, how do we then come back to feel really connected and soft with one another, and just the comfort, the familiar comfort returns. And it was sort of interesting to have that experience of going, what do we actually need to do here to bring this back? And you can speak to that, but I sort of found it was like just really little things of like our little rituals or our little jokes and kind gestures, like small kind gestures that we'd offer to one another, asking for hugs and finding things that are soothing to do that. But it was just another junction when I was like, don't have a playbook for this. I haven't done it before.
Never got to this point before. Yeah. And I think you work it out, I mean, I think it's good. Some people will need a little bit of space, and it is a little tricky when one person is wanting to be held, because obviously touch and coming back together, I mean, a lot of couples will, have makeup sex, for example, because there is this needing for physical reconnection or for co-regulation. And I'm not necessarily recommending that as a pathway, because that it's not about, getting addicted to the cycle of like conflict and then makeup sex. And if you're wanting that, toxicity of the up and down consistently, that also is something to look at about, are you comfortable with chaos, and you're kind of in some ways seeking it out and unconsciously creating it to keep yourself on that dynamic. But that can be one way, cuddling, asking for touch and working out what it is that each of you wants and needs. And it can be a bit tricky if one like wants space and then one wants, to be held or cuddled or, touched in that moment. So, even you have to talk about that too. It's like, I noticed what worked for us after, it was really nice when you came and hugged me. Like, positive reinforcement's also always really good. Like, it felt really good to, joke and laugh with you. That was a really nice way for us to come out of that. Like, I felt like it was really smooth, the way that the way that you did this or that. And sometimes it's when both people don't want to offer something. Again, we have to think about that's a little bit of ego coming in, like, well, I'm not going to be the one to like, because she or he did this. And so then you both are at stalemate. It's about choosing to give and choosing to come from a place of compassion. And if you've had the right kind of conversation, that's obviously going to be easier. But one of you is going to have to fall on the sword and make the offering. And the offering might be a joke. It might be a, coupley reference that you have. It might be a cuddle. It might be a come here, or it might be initiating, sexual intimacy, whatever it might be. And to recognize if your partner does that for you, maybe you were the prickly one at that moment, to see how good that feels and to try to be the one that offers it another time so that it's not always on the one partner can be good. But yeah, just witnessing what works, what feels good, expressing it to the partner, appreciating them and whatever they did, even saying if you were like the prickly one that hadn't quite come back, thank you for coming forward. And, that really allowed me to come out of and sometimes that's what, we're often needing is like touch. It does really come back to that co-regulation of having the other person, like what are they there for? It's like there is this co-regulation that can happen with the two of you. And some of you may still be feeling a little bit like, oh, maybe we've talked about it, but do they still, now if I've said all of that, you have that vulnerability hangover, like, oh, now I've said all of that, do they still find me attractive? Do they still, love me? Do they still want to be with me? And so the touch or those things can be supportive to reinforce and confirm that. But also recognizing if they're making a joke with you, seeing it for what it is. It's a bid for affection. It's a bid for intimacy. It's coming back to lightness, the partner that brings the lightness back. That is also a really valuable laughter. We called the bump in the road we had the incident that we're now laughing about, the incident, which at a moment felt like this has the potential to be the ending. And now it's the incident that we laugh about. And I think that is also really like joking about it, and being like, oh, and you got a little bit, not in a mean way, just like it's good to have levity. Like I think laughter is good. It's another way that we heal. And seeing that the way we navigated that, how he showed up in it has given me so much more confidence in, the relationship and who he is. Like, you might know that or you think that they're like that, but you have to see it in play. So it's a really good opportunity when those things come up that you might in the moment prefer not. Like, I wish this wasn't happening, will definitely be part of the thought process. But the more arcs of this you go through, the more you get used to it. And then you get, there is emotional safety because you know that ultimately you've done it enough times that the person is not going to show up in any of those ways. And if they do, then you've got to talk about that aspect as too, is this doesn't allow us to talk, or, can you come back when you've done some reflection? Can you, see what it is? I understand that you're really angry about this, but what is this really about? Because it doesn't feel like it's about the dishwasher. Is there something else for you? It wasn't about the dishwasher. But, for example, because if you're the one that's kind of a little bit more, you've done the work and you're a bit more emotionally attuned, then maybe they, you need to ask them for that. And they may not, like, I don't know, like, okay, well, it'd be great if you could get some support on working that out, or, how can I support you in that, because it feels like there's something deeper going on here. And I think unless we get to the bottom of that, we're not going to be able to unlock this pattern, and maybe we need to see someone, and that's okay. We don't need to go by that old rule book of like, oh, you only go to relationship therapy if the whole relationship's, falling apart. It's like, that hasn't really worked for people. At that point, you're too far gone. We need to be investing in it early. It's a good idea. It's a good practice. Yeah, it's cool now. So cool.
It's really helpful. And I know, I think there's so much to learn along the way. And what I'm discovering with this is that it does take the repetition of, figuring this out and going through the process and gathering the evidence of consistency with one another, and the way that we both show up for one another. And it's like we're building this skill set of how we do these things, how we have these conversations, and how we show up for one another, and how we reconnect, how we resolve, how we move forward, and growth in that way. But then it's also the healing part is, it does take repetition of doing this.
Yeah, it takes time. And I think being growth orientated is really supportive, like understanding that you're growing as a person. Like, what a great gift that your partner is giving you, even if they're reflecting something back to you that's difficult. Like, maybe, you have to reflect to your partner that they're being a bit defensive, or they're, hey, and it's the way that you do it. The tone and the intention does matter. So if someone's like, oh, I'm just giving you, feedback, I'm so helping you grow, and they're like kind of, being mean or yelling at you, that's not really, it's got to come with heart. And that is where it becomes a really beautiful growth vehicle. Is like, this is a person that you feel emotional safety with, who really does care about you, who loves you, who is able to offer you the kinds of reflections that no one else can really do. And they may be able to support you into growth and a better experience of life, better relationships across the board through those pieces of navigation. How it's done is important. So that's the piece that we can take responsibility for. It's like how we reflect things to a partner, coming at it with care and compassion, and considering, how would I feel if this were me? How would I like to receive it? And then, witnessing how they respond, and, how does it land for them, and there are ways that you can adjust it, learning about your partner, wanting to understand them more. Then it can become very interesting, is when we're trying to keep it all smooth and have no conflict ever, and think that is the pinnacle of relating. It's like that, those relationships, often there's just a lot being unsaid, and there's people that aren't aware of what actually is going on for them, or they're too afraid, or they keep being like, oh, that'll be okay, until suddenly it's not okay. So understanding that it's a pathway of growth, and if we're interested in that, and sometimes in that moment you're like, I don't want to grow, I just want to be comfortable. That's kind of what you're feeling. But then you come back together and you felt seen, and you've learned, and you've, been able to hold each other through it. It can be very powerful, a very powerful experience. So just recognizing when that rupture appears, like, it's there for a reason. What is it here to offer me? And to just own your own 50% of that pathway, is just to see, okay, where is this leading us? It can be really powerful, very interesting.
Well, I'm sure I'll be able to report back with whatever happens next.
You feeling unbound?
I am feeling unbound. Yeah, I am. I think, do you know, like, there's so much growth available in it, and there's so much to glean from these experiences. It does take a lot of like mental and emotional energy.
It does. And I think, you have to honor that, which is like that moment where you're like, oh, I'd rather be doing my work, I'd be rather doing all these things. But in that moment, the need of the time, like, what is the most value for you in your soul's pathway and your experience of life, is actually that. it is releasing your fear of abandonment. It is releasing your fear of not being seen or your fear of your own anger, whatever it is. It is transcending that. And that's why it's come up. And so it's when our mind is like, these other things are more important than our emotional state, which also tracks back to the whole pathway of suppression of emotions and how it's just, it's not relevant, it's needed, it's waste of time, don't be so needy, sensitive, whatever it is. It's like, nature's showing us that this is the most important thing you could be doing with your time in that moment, and whatever it takes, because what are we really looking for? What are we all here for? We're wanting to feel love. We want to feel connection, present, happy, free. We only get to all of those points through the release of whatever we've been holding. And through being able to truly connect with others, either with ourselves, if we're in a relationship with ourselves, that is our primary relationship, whether we're in relationship with a partner or not, we can still go through that process within ourselves, whether we're in relationship with, friends or partners or pets or just nature itself, all of it, that deeper sense of presence and connectivity. And what you notice is when you release and alchemize one of these patterns, there's a deeper sense of presence. You become more present because each trigger, each pattern that you're running is taking you away from the moment. So it is developing a deeper sense of presence and connection, which is it's a spiritual pathway ultimately. So if we're wanting all of those things, we have to recognize this is what it takes to get there. It's being offered to you in that moment and you're just immediately rejecting, like, no, not this. I'd rather just keep working and doing all the other things. But actually, and if you witness that, then you can the next time be like, okay, yes, it's not my preference, I'm uncomfortable, but I'm just going to stay online and see where this goes and trust that we have all the resources that we need to get through this within ourselves and without ourselves if needed. And then let's see what it's going to look like on the other side.
Yeah. Thank you, Georgia. That was great.
Thanks,
I think
Hannah.
that was really.
Thanks for sharing.
Oh, fighting is fun, isn't it? I mean, but I think that's so helpful. I really do think that is so helpful to talk about conflict and the greater purpose of, why we have some friction and rub up against other people, and which is ultimately rubbing up against ourselves.
Yep.
So, well, look at us go.
Exactly.
What will we talk about next? Let's find out.
Well, keep us posted on how your conflict resolution is going, and we'll see you for whatever next topic we have. No idea. We'll see where all this is leading.
We'll find out on the day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Georgia. Thanks, everyone.
Ka kite.
Bye.
Thanks for getting unbound with us today. We'd so appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave us a review and to share this episode with anyone who you think could benefit. It helps us to keep these conscious conversations flowing. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. See you next week.